Did you shoot the assignment? Now, I know that those of you who went out and shot the assignment are probably thinking, oh no, he's not going into that lecture again, right? And, for those of you who did shoot, rock on, man, you guys are awesome. But for those of you who struggled to get out there into the field and shoot the assignment, I just want to say, don't do yourself a disservice. I know it's hard. I know it's challenging to get out and shoot these assignments that seem very technical. They're not really focused as much on creating amazing images, and you're like chomping at the bit to get out there and create some really amazing stuff. But you gotta push yourself in order to get there. Anything that's worth doing and anything that has the potential for you to accomplish something great is going to require some effort. I mean, just think about some of the stuff that you've done underground, some of the experiences you've had caving. I mean, those didn't come easy. You didn't just one day decide, I'm going to be a caver, and then you went out and you pushed like the hardest freaking virgin cave ever. I mean, you had to build yourself up to that. You had to develop certain skills to be able to navigate that underground, to develop that endurance to go in and, push some of these caves that you've been in. Same thing happens with photography and with cave photography. In order to get there, you have got to push yourself to master these technical concepts so that when we get out to, really creating the amazing works, you've got the skills you get the tools in your belt to go out and make that happen. The only way that's going to happen is if you shoot the assignments. So last time I'm going to say it, if you haven't done it, turn off the camera, go shoot the assignment, come back and join us. And for those of you who did it, rock on. We are going to now dive into another level, another layer of cave photography and how to make your shots that much better. Now, one of the things that you probably noticed as you were out there shooting or looking at your photos afterwards is that with that single flash firing, whether it was side light, backlight, or probably not in front light, but with side light and backlight, that a lot of the shadows in your shot were totally black. I mean, there was no detail at all in them. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's really only a bad thing if you decided you wanted detail in those shadows, that there was something in the shadows, maybe elements of the formation or part of the passage or part of the caver that you wanted to be able to see, and it got lost totally in the shadows. That's where it becomes a problem. So we're going to talk today about how to bring that out. And to do that, we're going to tap into the power of front light. Now, you're probably looking at me saying, what? You said front light was bad. You said don't use front light. Well, in almost all cases, you don't want to rely on front light as your primary light source, and that's where front light becomes a problem. When the front light becomes the primary source of light, then that overpowering light washes out, again, like we said, all of the detail, the textures, and creates kind of a weird, kind of flat look to the photo. But when we control the intensity of that front light and combine it with a more intense side or backlight, we can use that to sort of bring out the detail in the shadows. But you have to be really careful how you use that because you don't want that front light to overpower the other lights. Otherwise, it starts to degrade the look of your photograph. So how do you do that then? That's what we need to talk about now. We're going to talk about how you go out and how you experiment a little bit with front light. So what you're going to do, and we're going to go over an assignment here in just a second, but what you're going to do, you need 2 flashes to do this, and I want you to only use 2 flashes. If you have 3 or 4, then put the extras aside for this assignment and for this practice, and only use those 2. So you're going to need 1 light that you're going to hold in the front. Could be attached to your camera, or it could just be here kind of off to the side of you or the camera. So you're going to need that light. You're going to need another light to use as a side light or a backlight or some variation of that. So the first thing that you need to do is set up your main light. We'll call it your key light. That's going to be the sort of the primary source of light. So that could be coming from the side or the back. You'll set that up and you'll go ahead and fire it off until you get the exposure right. And then you'll take the front light and you're going to play with a variation of settings on that to kind of control the brightness of that light. So maybe at first you fire it off at full intensity, and you'll notice when you do that how it kind of washes out the foreground and has this kind of flat lighty effect with a little bit of an enhancement from the other light. And then what you'll do is take and tone that down. So maybe you'll take, remember, if we go back to the exposure controls, you'll either take the intensity of the flash and dial it from full to a half, and leave the key light, the side light or the back light, wherever you got that set up, you'll leave that set exactly where it was before on the proper exposure. And so you'll take the fill light, dial it down, and then fire off both flashes. And then you'll notice that that effect of front light, where it washes out the shadows, starts to diminish. And then dial it down to a quarter, and then to an eighth, and then as far down as you can go. And you'll notice that as you do that, you'll find a sweet spot in there. There's no perfect answer of what is right and what is wrong, but you'll hit a spot where it's like, yeah, that's the amount of detail I wanted in the shadows. And if I go a little too brighter, then that's too bright. It's bringing out too much detail and overpowering the side light or the backlight. And if I go too dark, well, now I don't quite see what I want in the shadows. So you have to sort of tune that like you're tuning a musical instrument. You'll go a little bit too far and in one direction and a little bit too far in the other direction until you can find that sweet spot. Now, what do you do if you're out there shooting and you set up your key light, your main light, and then you fire off your fill light, the front light here, and it just washes it off. So you dial it down to a quarter or a half, washing everything out. You dial it down to a quarter, washing everything out. And it just keeps doing that as you dial it down. Well, what may be the case is that fill light that you have is just a lot more intense than the key light. So maybe you could try swapping the lights and then see if that works. Now, if that doesn't work, if your one light really isn't any brighter, they're the exact same flash, then what else could you try? Think back to the exposure lesson that we did. What are your options? Well, you can control flash by varying the output, which we just tried. And the other is you can vary the distance of the flash. So maybe the fill light that you have right here is like a foot away from your subject, and the other one is like 15 feet away from your subject. Okay, well maybe then I need to vary the distance to my subject with the fill light if I can. If I can't, then what can I do? I can cover it up. Maybe take a black card and cover it up so it's just a little corner showing, and then fire that off. So there are ways that you can adjust the intensity, but ultimately what you want to be able to accomplish is to see your scene where the fill light, that front light, is overpowering and then dial it all the way down to where the fill light is, the shadows are almost to the point of being black. So you want to play with that range so that you can find the sweet spot. Now, if the reverse is true, where you're firing off the fill light and you fire it off at maybe an eighth and it's dark, and you dial it up and it's still dark, you keep dialing it up all the way as much as you can go, and you move it closer and it's still too dark, well then what can you do? Well, you can try again swapping lights, playing with distance, maybe adjusting the exposure on your camera. You've got a lot of different tools to play with. But ultimately what you want to do is set up that key light, get the exposure right, and then your fill light, which is the front light, adjust that and vary it. And that's what you're going to be playing with. So with that said, let's go ahead now and jump over to the assignment. I'm going to walk you through how you do this, and I'm going to send you out to shoot. So let's head on over. Actually, before we jump over into the assignment and do a review, let's take a look at a quick visual example of what it is I'm talking about when I talk about using fill light and key light and how to get that, that mix to work out well. So in this shot here, I've gone ahead and I've set up my key light. Again, that key light can be anything but front light. So it can be side light, back light, and you can play with all sorts of different positions and variations of that. So just find a spot where your first light, your key light, goes off and it looks really good. But you end up maybe having some areas that are really deeply in shadow. So like here over on the left-hand side, where, where this column is. I'm not seeing a lot of the detail there in that shadow towards the top, the bottom, and then here in the foreground towards the bottom. So I've got some areas of dark shadow, but I'm really liking the light here. I like how this works. So I set that up. I go ahead and get my front light set up, which is going to be my fill light, and get it ready to fire off. And maybe I'm going to start it off really, really dim, so really low in intensity. So maybe I start it off, if I can dial it down to like a 16th or a 32nd of the intensity, I'll start there. Because remember, what you want is to see that whole range from you're seeing virtually no effect of the fill light to you're seeing so much that the fill light is blowing out the shot and it looks like, it looks like this nasty front light. That's kind of what you're going for this whole range. So I started off really dim and I go ahead and fire off my fill light. I get something like, maybe like this. So you'll notice now the details in the shadows are beginning to appear. But maybe I want to see a little bit more. So I go ahead and increase the intensity from something like, 16th to an 8th. And I get something that's a little more like that. So now I'm really starting to see that detail, but maybe I want to see a little bit more. So I go ahead and bump that up to a quarter or a half. And now I'm really seeing that detail in there, but maybe it's getting to a point that it's a little bit too intense. It's starting to look more like front light than I really want it to. But I'm going to go ahead and keep bumping it up. So let's take it a little bit more. And then we increase the intensity. Maybe this time I go ahead and fire off the flash like 2 or 3 times. And I get something like this. Well, now that's really starting to look like that nasty front light. And there we go for our final shot, and that is totally front lit. I'm getting a little bit here of that side light, or that side light backish light picked up on the stalactite. You can see a little bit there. You can see a little bit on the rim of the caver's face. So I'm picking it up a little bit, but that front light is really washing out the whole shot and making it look kind of crappy. So, but now the nice thing about this is I've got a whole range of photos to select from to figure out what level of detail in the shadows do I want and what don't I want. And then what I can do is go, make note of what settings did I use so that next time I go underground, I get a good sense of maybe where a good starting point is. And then I can finesse it a little bit from there. So let's take a look. Here again is that last shot where the fill light is totally overpowering the shot. And then here's that first shot where I see no effect of fill light. And then you've got, again, all these subtle variations in between. And at this point, you just have to decide which one is the one that I like the best. Which one brings out the detail that I want, and which ones are maybe it's a little too intense or not enough. So that's an example using fill light in sort of a passage. Let's take a look at another shot here. So here we have an example of a formation. So I've got my key light set up off to the side and down below a little bit. It's firing off. It looks pretty nice, but maybe I want to see some of the detail right here in the middle. And I'm not really seeing it with just that one key light going off to the side. So let's go ahead again and we'll set the intensity of that fill light really, really, really low. Fire it off at like 1/32 or 16th or whatever you can start it at. Or maybe you've covered up almost all of your flash but one little sliver because you don't have the ability to adjust those the intensity on your flash. So you can adjust it again by covering it up with a little black card. So I fire it off with just a little bit of the flash showing, and I'm bringing out a little detail there, but let's take it up a little more. There we go. You can see the detail slowly appearing, and that's pretty nice. Taking it up here, that looks okay too. And as I keep going, you'll notice, again, it starts shifting from, that key light was the most important light to now the fill light is really starting to overpower my shot to the point where I bring it up, and now it's just all about that front light, and it's washing out the effect that I got, if we take it all the way back to where I started, that nice textural effect that I had with that side light going. So I lose the balance here, I lose the balance here. So you got to figure out somewhere in between. I mean, where is that magic spot at? All right, so let's do a quick summary overview of the assignment and what you're going to master. Like I said, this assignment is focused completely on mastering fill light. So that's what your focus is going to be on with this assignment. The assignment checklist, things you're going to need to do. We're going to do a slight repeat of the last assignment, except for instead of photographing your subject with front light, you're going to use front light to fill the shadows. So you will photograph the following. First, you're going to find a caver that you can take a picture of. And the first shot you're going to do, you're going to set up your side light. So I want this caver to be side lit. So set up your side light, set up your front light, which is going to be your fill light, and make sure that both of those lights are properly exposed. That's called a 1-to-1 ratio. So your side light is going to be properly exposed and your fill light is going to be properly exposed. And it's probably not going to look that great. It's going to look very front lit with a little bit of an accent. So 1-to-1 start off with. Second, you're going to make sure that fill light is 1 stop darker. Side light's going to stay exactly the same, but the fill light needs to go 1 stop. That basically means cutting the intensity of the light in half. So dial it down a half, move it, double the distance back, whatever you need to do to cut that light in half. Next, you're going to do it 2 stops darker on the fill light. Again, side light remains the same, and then 3 stops darker on the fill light, and then the side light will stay the same. Next, you're going to slightly mix that up. You're going to stick with the caver, but you're going to photograph the caver with a backlight. So you'll set a backlight as your main light, and then you'll set up the front light as the fill light. Make sure that both of those are properly exposed, so the backlight will look great by itself. The fill light will look nasty by itself because it's front light, it wipes out all the shadows and everything. So you're going to make sure that both of those are properly exposed. 1-to-1 ratio, fire them off, and then you're going to repeat what we did before. So you're going to leave that backlight set where it is, and then take the fill light, dial it down a half, and then you're going to take it 2 stops darker. So 1 stop darker, 2 stops darker, 3 stops darker, and then you're going to move on to the next subject. So you're going to continue to repeat that process with a formation. So find a, average sized formation. It could be a, small stalactite or a column or whatever you want to do, whatever formation, a wall of formation, something that's relatively small. So you do a formation. Next, you're going to do a passage, and that's it. So you'll do those 3 things: side lit, backlit, and then varying the intensity of that fill light so you can see where the sweet spot is. Okay, last of all, there's a reflection for you to do. So the question that you'll be addressing is, as you varied the brightness of your fill light, did you find that there was a setting that worked better than others, and why was that? And the second question, did you feel like there was a sweet spot where if you kept the fill light within that range, you ended up walking away with a much nicer shot? And then second, what are you going to do to remember that next time that you're shooting underground? The last thing that's on this assignment is, of course, an exposure log. You'll need the subject description, aperture, ISO, and then the fill light exposure. Remember to keep a log of that. And this is, again, going back to like those of you who didn't shoot the assignment when you're walking into this lesson, this is part of the hard part. This is part of the struggle and where you really have to push yourself, because if you don't keep the log, it's really hard to go back and reflect and say, well, what worked and why did it work? What didn't work and why exactly didn't it work? So take the exposure log, use it underground, try the best you can to keep it from getting destroyed by mud and water and all that. But, try to use it underground. Get it laminated if you need to, write with permanent marker, whatever you need to do. But make sure you keep that log so you can remember what you were going for and whether or not, and discover after whether or not you achieved it and why you did that. All right, so I think that's it on this lesson. Challenge now, shut off the video, plan a caving trip, go out and master this concept so that you've got another tool under your belt. Because in the next couple of lessons, we're going to start to learn how you can really take things to the next level.